You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you. Do you understand these rights as they have been read to you? The Miranda rights are used to inform a person under arrest of their rights, that they can stay silent when they are interviewed and are allowed to speak with an attorney before proceeding with the investigation. These Miranda rights originate from the 1966 case of Miranda v. Arizona, where Ernesto Miranda argued that he was unaware of his right to not self-incriminate during questioning. In the 1966 case of Miranda v. Arizona, the Supreme Court ruled that it would be the responsibility of officers to inform an arrestee of their rights to a lawyer and to avoid self-incrimination. This case redefined the rights of citizens arrested by police and shifted law enforcement procedures across the United States. On March 3, 1963, 18-year-old Patricia Ware was walking home from her job in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. She was abducted by an unfamiliar man, shoved into his car, and driven to a secluded area in the middle of the desert. It was in that secluded spot that he sexually assaulted Ware, before driving her back to the city and dropping her off. Her assaulter told her to pray for him as he left her on the side of the street, likely assuming that it would not be long before the police came knocking at his door. Just over a week later, on March 14th, Detective Carol Cooley and his colleagues identified Ernesto Miranda as a suspect from a description of his car that Ware had given to the police. He went without argument to the police station to be questioned. He was not arrested during this interaction. There are several accounts that describe Miranda's arrival to the station. It is known that he was interrogated by the police and Detective Cooley extensively. During his examination, he answered all questions asked, admitting to the crime he had been accused of. By the end of his interrogation, Miranda had signed a written confession. He would later claim that he was not aware that confession was not legally required. In every account, he had not been informed that it was not necessary that he self-incriminated. This emphasized a major flaw with the judicial system, considering that he was unaware of his legal rights to stay silent. On June 27, 1963, Miranda was sentenced to 55 years in prison by Judge McFate. Miranda's court-appointed lawyer, Alvin Moore, and the American Civil Liberties Union took up his case, arguing that he was not informed of his rights to remain silent. They appealed to the Arizona Supreme Court to attempt to lift his sentencing. The state Supreme Court agreed with the lower court, finding Miranda guilty. He then appealed to the United States Supreme Court, arguing law enforcement did not inform him of either his Fifth or Sixth Amendment rights. The federal Supreme Court took his case, giving Miranda a second chance. The new case presented his written confession as evidence that his Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights had been violated. Chief Justice Earl Warren delivered the opinion of a 5-4 majority that Miranda's rights had in fact been obstructed. Warren closed the case by saying, "Prior to any questioning, the person must be warned that he has a right to remain silent, that any statement he does make may be used as evidence against him, and that he has a right to the presence of an attorney, either retained or appointed." The Supreme Court deemed that the responsibility of warning a defendant that they had the ability to stay silent if they chose to fell into the hands of law enforcement. Police were now required to inform a suspect that they had the right to speak to an attorney, and if an attorney could not be afforded, then the court would appoint one. It was only after these rights were stated and were explicitly clear to the defendant that police could use any information or evidence gathered against them during an investigation in a court of law. If the prosecution could not prove that the warnings were received and understood, then the information could not be used in court. Before this ruling, it was understood that the people held the responsibility of knowing their rights. Now, it became the police force's responsibility to inform citizens. Ernesto Miranda's original sentencing was lifted by the Supreme Court, and he was retried without the previously signed confession. There was still too much evidence stacked against him, though, and he was jailed again for a maximum time of 30 years. The American Constitution was drafted in 1787, signed by delegates of the 13 colonies. The first 10 amendments were ratified into the Constitution in 1791. These 10 amendments are also known as the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights guarantees civil rights and liberties to American citizens, such as freedom of speech or right to bear arms. The Miranda rights highlights the Fifth and Sixth Amendments in the American Constitution. The Fifth Amendment is stated as such: "No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces, or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. Nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. In simpler terms, the Fifth Amendment gives American citizens the right to refrain from self-incrimination. It states that, legally, they cannot be forced to hold testimony against their own person. The Fifth Amendment also prevents a person from being put in a situation of double jeopardy, where they are tried twice for the same crime. As well, it prevents a citizen from being denied the necessities that is life, liberty, or property without proper intervention in a court of law or compensation. The Sixth Amendment is more about the legal process, stating that, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial, by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witness against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. This amendment is stating that all persons accused of a crime will be given a public trial with a jury of unbiased peers of the district's choosing. Furthermore, the Sixth Amendment calls for the person on trial to be informed of the nature of their arrest and accusation, as well as the ability to obtain witnesses in their favor. A fair trial for all would also mean equal opportunities to legal protection, such as the right to an attorney. This means that the Sixth Amendment protects the court's ability to appoint a defense attorney to all accused people. The Miranda rights remind defendants of three incredibly important details during their arrest: that they have the right to stay silent, they have the right to a lawyer, and that they have the right to a fair trial in a court of law. The responsibility of knowing these rights shifted from the citizens to the police. Police officers hold the responsibility of informing citizens under arrest of what their Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights are. Miranda rights are typically read off during an arrest. If the rights are not read out before an interrogation, then any information obtained is unusable in a court of law under proof that the defendant was not aware of their rights. Despite the fact that it is a requirement if police want to use any statements against a defendant in court, Miranda rights may not always be read. The police are not required to make the statement during an arrest, unless they intend to keep the persons in custody and interrogate them. However, most officers read them regardless in the case that the person is needed in the current investigation. The responsibility of respecting constitutional rights falls into officer hands as well. Police are required by law to respect the choice to remain silent or the refusal of answering questions during an interrogation. While they have the ability to lie to a suspect in order to get an admission of guilt, they are unable to use threats or acts of violence to get information out of a person. As well, the police take the responsibility of ensuring that the case is valid. If a defendant is not aware of their Miranda rights and does not sign a confessional waiver, then any evidence gathered in an investigation is invalid. The case can even be dropped if there is no other evidence to convict the detainee. The responsibility of reading the Miranda rights and a person's reminder of their rights falls into the hands of the police. A 1963 Arizona court case about a man accused of kidnapping and rape transformed into one of the largest cases concerned with the expression of the Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights. Ernesto Miranda was charged with the kidnapping and rape of the 18-year-old Patricia Ware. He confessed to the crime the moment he was interrogated, but he was unaware of his constitutional right to stay silent. His case was brought to the United States Supreme Court, where he was allowed a second trial without the evidence of his signed confession to be used. The case of Miranda versus Arizona created the Miranda rights, a statement used before arrest to clarify the people's rights to those being detained. It has since become the responsibility of the police to assure that people know their rights. The Miranda rights are used today, and their unwritten procedures, like how far police must take their responsibility to inform citizens, are always being changed, as demonstrated in the 2022 case of Vega versus Takao, where the question of whether a citizen can sue an officer for not reading the Miranda rights. And even more recently, where the question of Luigi Mangione's trial's legitimacy comes into play as it's reported that he was not read his rights. The Supreme Court case of Miranda versus Arizona and the creation of Miranda rights ensures that the suspects are informed of their Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights during arrest and holds the police responsible for notifying the people of their right to decline self-incrimination.